She grabbed Imani's wrist, so hard the bones ground together. Not a warning, not an accident. Kang Mi-suk's silk robe, jade bracelet, eyes like cold winter stone looked down at her son's wife, the way you look at something stuck to the bottom of your shoe. And she squeezed. "You will sign these papers," she said in Korean, her voice barely above a whisper. "Or I will make sure my son sees exactly what kind of woman he brought into this family." Imani didn't scream, she didn't beg. She just looked back at this woman who had eaten at the same table as her for 3 years, and felt something inside her go very, very quiet. That silence was the most terrifying thing in the room. If that were you, if the people who were supposed to become your family treated you this way inside the walls of your own home, what would you do? Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications. Because we tell stories like this every single week. Stories about survival, betrayal, and the kind of love that doesn't quit, even when everything around it is trying to break it down. Drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if this one moves you, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Now, let's go back to Seoul. The rain came down hard on Seoul that Thursday night. Not the soft kind of rain that makes people feel romantic about the city. The mean kind. The kind that gets inside your collar and sits there, cold and heavy, the whole ride home. The kind of rain that makes taxi drivers quiet and security guards pace. Inside the Kang family mansion in Songbuk-dong, the kitchen lights were the only ones still on. Every other room was dark. The household staff had been dismissed for the evenings, sent to their quarters early, the way they always were when Mrs. Kang Mi-suk decided the night was hers to run. The housekeeper, a cautious woman named Cha Young-hee, who had worked for the Kang family for 11 years, had walked past the kitchen doorway at 7:15. She had seen what was on the floor. She had kept walking because she had a daughter in university and a mother with a bad hip, and she could not afford to lose this job. That was the thing nobody talked about. How many people saw? How many people kept walking? Imani Brooks Kang was 31 years old and sitting on the kitchen floor. Not because she had fallen, not because she was drunk or sick or lost. She was sitting on the floor because the chair she usually sat in at the kitchen table, a perfectly ordinary chair, solid and straight-backed, had been quietly removed 3 days ago, and no one had brought it back. She had asked once. The young kitchen assistant, barely 20, had looked at her with something between and terror, and said only that he would check with Mrs. Kang. He never came back to tell her anything, so Imani sat on the floor. In front of her was a wooden tray. On the tray was a bowl of rice that had gone cold about an hour ago, some kimchi that had been sitting out too long, and half a piece of grilled mackerel that looked like someone had already picked the good parts off. She was hungry. She had been hungry since noon. She ate anyway. This was the thing about Imani that people who only saw her from the outside could never quite understand. She had this quality her mother used to call it stubbornness. Her college roommate called it dignity, and her husband, when he was being honest with himself, recognized it as the single most formidable thing about her, of refusing to be destroyed by small humiliations. She would eat cold rice off a floor tray before she would cry in front of Mi-suk. She would sleep on 3 inches of courtesy before she would beg for warmth. She picked up the chopsticks. They were the cheap, disposable kind. The good chopsticks, the lacquered ones, with the Kang family crest etched into the handles, the ones Imani had been given as a wedding gift and used every day, for the first 2 months of their marriage, had disappeared from her place setting sometime in the 2nd year. She had never mentioned it to Tae-jun. She had never mentioned most things to Tae-jun. The sound of heels on marble came from the hallway. Imani's shoulders didn't tighten. She had trained herself out of that reaction. Tightening your shoulders meant you were afraid, and being afraid meant they had already won something. She just sat there with her chopsticks and her cold rice and waited. Mi-suk appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was dressed like she was going to a dinner party or coming back from one. The silk robe was a formality, the kind wealthy Korean women wore in their own homes as a kind of costume. The jade bracelet on her left wrist caught the kitchen light and threw a small green shadow on the floor. She was 62 years old and had the posture of a woman who had never once stooped. She looked at Imani on the floor. Something moved across her face that wasn't quite satisfaction. It was something worse than satisfaction. It was the look of a person confirming a belief they'd already decided was true. "Still here," Mi-suk said, in Korean. She knew perfectly well that Imani's Korean had gotten significantly better over 3 years of living in Seoul. That was actually one of the things that irritated her most. That this foreign woman had been quietly, stubbornly learning, but she spoke Korean in these moments, the way some people use a language as a locked door. Imani answered in Korean. "Still here," she said. Mi-suk's expression shifted slightly. Not enough to call it surprise. More like a chess player, noting that a piece they expected to place had moved 1 square. "My son calls tomorrow," Mi-suk said. "You will not tell him about the documents." 3 nights ago, Imani had been brought into the study Mi-suk's study, which had originally been designated as a shared family space, but had been quietly colonized over 2 years and presented with a stack of papers. Legal papers, the kind with small print and signature lines at the bottom of each page. Imani had picked up the first page and read it carefully. She read slowly, partly because legal Korean was still difficult for her, partly because she wanted to be absolutely certain she understood what she was looking at. She understood it on the 3rd page. It was an asset agreement. Effectively a quiet waiver of her claims to several properties that were, technically, registered under both her name and Tae-jun's. The kind of document that a lawyer would describe as routine in a restructuring, and that a different kind of lawyer would describe as financial manipulation. Imani had put the papers down. She had said calmly in Korean, "I need to speak with my husband before I sign anything." And that was when Mi-suk had grabbed her wrist. Now, standing in the kitchen doorway at 9 o'clock at night, looking at her daughter-in-law eating cold rice from a tray on the floor, Mi-suk said it again. "You will not tell him about the documents." Imani set down her chopsticks. She looked up at Mi-suk, really looked at her, the way she rarely allowed herself to, because looking directly at this woman for too long felt like staring into something that would rather see her gone, and she said, quietly, "I haven't decided yet what I'm going to tell him." The air in the kitchen changed. Mi-suk took 3 steps into the room. Her heels were very loud on the tile floor. She stopped about 4 feet from where Imani was sitting, close enough that Imani would have to crane her neck to maintain eye contact, which was almost certainly the point. "You think he chose you?" Mi-suk said. Her voice was very controlled, almost pleasant. "He chose a problem he didn't understand yet. Men do that. They confuse novelty with love. He will see eventually. The only question is whether you leave with something or with nothing." Imani was quiet for a moment. "You've been saying that for 3 years," she said. "He hasn't seen it yet. He isn't home," Mi-suk said. "He's in Busan. He won't be back until Saturday." She tilted her head slightly. "You have 2 more days to think about those papers." Imani picked her chopsticks back up. "Good night, Mrs. Kang," she said, and turned back to her food. This, right here, was the thing that made Mi-suk truly hate her. Not the stubbornness, not the refusal to cry or beg or make herself smaller. It was the courtesy. Imani could take every humiliation Mi-suk put in front of her and then look up and say goodnight in a voice that sounded like she actually meant it. There was something in that Mi-suk couldn't grab hold of. Something she couldn't get leverage on. It made her feel like she was pushing against a wall that kept gently absorbing the pressure and giving nothing back. Mi-suk left the kitchen without another word. Imani waited until the sound of her heels faded down the hallway. Then she set down her chopsticks again, very carefully, on the edge of the tray. She looked at the bruise on her wrist. It had gone from red to purple over the past 3 days. She had worn long sleeves since, not because she was ashamed, because there was no one in this house who would care, and showing it would only mean Mi-suk would know she had noticed. She pressed her thumb against the bruise, gently. She thought about calling Tae-jun. She'd been thinking about it for 3 days. Every time she picked up her phone, she put it back down again. Because what would she say? That his mother had grabbed her? That she'd been eating from a tray on the floor? That the chair she usually sat in had disappeared? She could see the conversation already, Tae-jun's voice going tight, the particular quality of silence that preceded something violent. The knowledge that whatever she said next would set in motion something she couldn't unset. She had spent 3 years trying to manage that knowledge, trying to hold the space between her husband's temper and the people he loved, even the people who were hurting her, maybe especially them. She heard footsteps, again different ones, lighter, quicker, and Sua appeared in the kitchen doorway. Tae-jun's younger sister was 27 years old and beautiful in the specific way of a person who spent considerable time and money learning how to present that beauty. She was also, in Imani's experience, significantly more dangerous than Mi-suk, because Mi-suk's cruelty was institutional and declarative, the kind you could almost understand even as it wounded you, while Sua's was inventive and personal. Sua paid attention. She learned what you cared about, and then she found the exact angle of attack. Eating again? Sua said, glancing at the tray. She said it the way you'd say it to someone you'd caught doing something slightly embarrassing. Imani didn't answer. You know Appa has a gala in 2 months, Sua said. She came fully into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, took out a bottle of sparkling water. Her movements were very casual, very at home. Imani noticed, not for the first time, how fluent Souza was at occupying space. Photographers everywhere, international press, lots of those pictures will circulate. She paused, looking at the water bottle. He doesn't say anything, but I know how it is for him. People talk. This was Sua's particular method. She never said anything explicit. She framed everything as concern. People talk. I'm just telling you. I worry about how it looks for him. Every sentence designed to plant a seed of self-doubt that Imani would then water herself in the middle of the night when there was no one to talk her out of it. Thank you for that, Imani said. She kept her voice even. Sua smiled. I'm just being honest. I think you deserve honesty. She twisted open the water bottle. Amma thinks you're going to cause a scene about those papers. I told her you were smarter than that. Imani looked at her directly. Are you going to tell me what those papers actually do? Since apparently everyone in this house has read them, except the person being asked to sign them. Something flickered across Sua's face. A kind of recalibration. Their routine, Sua said. A business restructuring. Appa asked for them before he left. He didn't mention them to me. He's busy. He doesn't explain every business decision to you. He's my husband. Yes, Sua said, and she let the word sit there for a moment with a very specific weight. He is. She took her water and left. Imani sat alone in the kitchen for a long time after that. She wasn't crying. She hadn't cried not in front of any of them, not once, in 3 years, and she wasn't going to start now. But there was a specific kind of tiredness she felt in these moments that was different from regular exhaustion. It was the tiredness of having to be careful all the time, of having to calculate every word, every expression, every response, of carrying a weight that no one else in this house had to carry, and doing it in a way that didn't show, because showing it meant they had broken through. She was so tired. She picked up her phone. She stared at Tae-jun's contact for a long time. Then she put the phone down, picked up the chopsticks, and finished eating the cold rice. 800 kilometers south, in a private room of a restaurant in Busan overlooking the harbor, Kang Tae-jun was trying to finish a conversation that had been going sideways for 40 minutes. He was 34 years old, and not a large man, not in the way people imagined when they heard the word mafia. Medium height, lean, unremarkable, close. The kind of man you could stand next to at an elevator and not think twice about. He wore his stillness the way other men wear expensive watches as an indication of something. People who knew what it indicated tended to give him a lot of room. The man across the table from him did not yet fully understand what it indicated. His name was Park Do-won, and he was 36 years old and had been Tae-jun's second lieutenant for 4 years. He was the kind of person who could be charming and efficient and reliable for a very long time, before you noticed that he had been quietly measuring every room he walked into for exits. Tae-jun had noticed it 18 months ago. He had been waiting to see what Do-hwan would do with the measuring. The Busan operation is solid, Do-hwan was saying. He had the particular manner of a man who is performing confidence rather than feeling it. The distribution chain holds, the customs contacts are covered, and the new agreements with the Zhang Group are. I know all of that, Tae-jun said. He hadn't touched his food. That's not what I'm asking you. Dahuan paused. What are you asking? I'm asking why you went to my mother. The silence was immediate and total. Du-hwan's face did something complicated. Tae-jun watched it happen, the way you watch a driver who's just realized they're going too fast for the turn ahead. The small recalculation, the split-second decision about which story to commit to. I don't know what you mean, Du-hwan said. You met with her twice in the last month, Tae-jun said. Once at the Hyatt, once at the restaurant near her gallery. You're not a person she would choose to have lunch with. She doesn't eat with employees. I'm not an employee, Du-hwan said carefully. And she contacted me. She had questions about the restructurings. She had questions about my schedule, Tae-jun said. And you answered them. Another silence. Different quality this time. Du-hwan leaned back slightly. Not far. Just enough. Tae-jun, I've been loyal to you for 4 years. Whatever your mother told you, she didn't tell me anything. Tae-jun finally picked up his chopsticks. Ate one piece of fish. Put them down again. I just came from the communications office. It was a productive afternoon. He looked at Du-hwan with something that was almost polite. I'm going home tomorrow. I thought you were staying until Saturday. I was, Tae-jun said. I changed my mind. He said it like it was nothing. Like it was the most ordinary thing. He reached for his water glass and took a sip, and the conversation moved on to shipping contracts and quarterly projections, and Du-hwan performed relief with moderate competence, and Tae-jun let him. The drive back to the hotel took 20 minutes. Tae-jun sat in the back seat and watched the Busan harbor lights moving past the window and thought about his wife eating dinner alone in Seoul. And he took out his phone and pulled up her contact, and his thumb hovered over the call button for almost a full minute before he put the phone away. He told himself it was because he didn't want to worry her. He was afraid of what he might hear in her voice. The storm hit Seoul at around 11 that night. Imani had moved to the room, by then the bedroom that was hers in every formal sense, and that she had slowly, carefully made her own over 3 years. The way you make a place yours when you're not entirely sure you'll be allowed to keep it. She had photographs of her mothers and sisters on the dresser. A small collection of books she'd brought from Chicago, worn paperbacks with cracked spines and pencil notes in the margins. A smell she'd ordered a candle from an American shop online, something with cedar and something citrusy, and the smell of it made the room feel like hers in a way the architecture never quite managed. She was sitting up in bed with a book she wasn't reading when her phone buzzed. Not Tae-jun, her friend Dara, in Chicago, wanting to know if they were still video calling this weekend. Imani stared at the message. How are things? Dara had added. You seem quiet lately. Imani had known Dara for 9 years. Dara was the kind of person who noticed quiet. She had noticed it in college when Imani was failing her sophomore chemistry lab and pretending she wasn't. She had noticed it when Imani's first serious friend had turned out to be a careful, considered liar. She noticed things, and she said them out loud, which was sometimes exactly what you needed, and sometimes the most exhausting thing in the world. Imani typed back, things are fine. Yes, this weekend. She put the phone face down on the nightstand. Outside the window, the rain was hitting the glass in irregular waves, the kind of rain that has some weather system behind it, some larger movement of air and pressure from far away. She listened to it for a long time. She thought about the documents. She thought about what Soo-ah had said he asked for them before he left, and she tried to make that true in her mind and couldn't. Not because she thought Tae-jun was incapable of business decisions. He didn't fully explain to her. He had entire rooms of his professional life that he kept closed, and she had said that, mostly. But the documents were about properties in her name, and Tae-jun was, in certain specific ways, meticulous about anything that touched her name. He'd been that way since the beginning, since Chicago, since the very first time he'd introduced her to anyone in his world and watched their face for signs of disrespect with a kind of concentrated attention that was alarming and, she had to admit, deeply reassuring. He would have told her. She was almost certain he would have told her. Which meant either Sua was lying, which was not a surprising possibility, or someone had convinced Tae-jun to sign off on something he hadn't fully understood either. Neither option was good. She reached over and turned off the bedside lamp. She lay in the dark and listened to the rain and felt the bruise on her wrist pulse quietly, like a small, mean clock. 2 more days, she thought. I'll decide in 2 more days. She was asleep by midnight. At 6:45, the next morning, Kang Tae-jun's car pulled up to a side entrance of the Kang family mansion in Songbuk-dong. He had taken the first train out of Busan at 5:15, which meant he'd barely slept. His security lead, a quiet man named Baek, who had been with him for 6 years and who had learned not to ask questions about certain decisions, was sitting in the front. They had not spoken much during the drive from the station. Tae-jun looked at the house from the car window. It was very still. No one moved in any of the visible windows. The kitchen light was on, which was normal. The morning staff usually arrived at 6 to begin breakfast prep. Everything looked ordinary. He couldn't explain why he felt the particular tension he felt. He'd felt it the night before, in Busan, making the decision to come home early. It wasn't logic exactly. More like something pulling slightly, the feeling of having left a door open somewhere that you couldn't remember opening. "I'll go in myself," he told Baek. "Sir, I'll call you." He went in through the side entrance, the one that bypassed the main foyer and fed directly into the east corridor. He knew every inch of this house. He had grown up in it. He knew which floorboards were loud and which weren't. Knew the particular way the east corridor smelled in the morning, the floor polish, something vaguely floral from his mother's study nearby, the faint ambient warmth of the kitchen. He walked toward the kitchen. He was still thinking about Do-hwan, about the conversation in Busan and what he'd seen in Do-hwan's face when he said, "I changed my mind." He was compiling things in his head, assembling what he'd found in the communications office the previous afternoon, trying to understand the full shape of something he wasn't yet certain about. He pushed open the kitchen door. He stopped. Imani was on the floor. She was sitting with her back against the base of the kitchen island, her knees drawn up, her hands in her lap. In front of her was a wooden tray with a bowl of food she clearly hadn't eaten yet, cold-looking, left there, like it had been placed there and not attended to. She was in her robe, hair not done yet, and she was completely still in the way of someone who hasn't realized they're being watched. But it wasn't the food that stopped him. It wasn't even that she was on the floor. It was his mother. Mi-suk was standing over her, and his mother's hand was raised. Not swinging, not touching, just raised at that specific height and angle that you only reach when you are making a point with your body, that your words aren't sufficient to make. Tae-jun stood in the doorway. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He felt something happen to the temperature of his own body, something very precise and very cold. And he stood there for what was probably 5 seconds, but felt much longer. And he watched his mother standing over his wife on the kitchen floor. And he understood in that specific wordless way that certain truths arrive, that this was not the first time. Mi-suk sensed him before she heard him. She turned, and her face did something Tae-jun had almost never seen it do in 34 years. It went afraid. Imani looked up. When she saw him, something crossed her face that broke something in his chest. Not relief, exactly, but something more complicated. Something like the face of a person who has been waiting for a particular moment for a very long time, and is not at all certain whether this is going to make things better or worse. Tae-jun looked at his mother. He looked at his wife. He looked at the tray on the floor. He looked at Imani's wrist. The bruise. The color of it. He stood there in the kitchen doorway of his own house, and for the first time since he was approximately 16 years old, Kang Tae-jun did not know what to do with his hands. Nobody moved for a long time. That was the thing Tae-jun would remember afterward, not the bruise, not his mother's raised hand, not the tray on the floor. He would remember the stillness, the way the three of them held that arrangement in the kitchen like something painted, like a moment that knew it was being recorded by the part of the brain that keeps the things you can never unfeel. Then Mi-suk lowered her hand. She did it slowly, with composure. The composure of a woman who had spent 62 years believing. That composure was the same thing as being right. Tae-jun, she said. Her voice was perfectly level. You're early. He didn't answer her. He was looking at Imani. Imani had not moved from the floor. She was looking back at him with that expression he'd clocked in the first second, the one that wasn't relief, wasn't fear, wasn't anything clean enough to name. She looked like a person calculating, even now, even at this exact moment, what the safest response was. And he recognized with a clarity that felt almost physical that she had gotten very good at that calculation. Too good. The kind of good that takes practice. The kind of good that means the situation requiring it has been going on for a long time. He crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and crouched down in front of her. He didn't touch her. He just looked at her face, then at her wrist, then back at her face. Hey, he said. Quiet, just that. She opened her mouth. Closed it again. Then she said, You weren't supposed to be home until Saturday. I know. Tae-jun misook again from behind him. This is not what it looks like. He stood up. He turned around. Misook was standing with her hands folded in front of her, her chin level, her posture perfect. She looked like she was prepared to deliver a statement. She probably had one ready. She was the kind of person who always had a statement ready. Don't, he said. Just the one word. Misook's mouth closed. He had not spoken to his mother in that tone since he was 22 years old, when he was still learning what kind of man he was going to be, and even then it had only been once. She blinked. Something moved across her face that might have been shock. He went back to Imani. He held out his hand, and she took it, and he helped her up from the floor, and when she was standing, he kept her hand. He kept her hand, and he looked at her wrist again, closer. The bruise was 3 days old at least, maybe 4. The color had gone past the red stage and settled into that deep purple black that meant it had been hit hard enough to damage something below the surface. Imani watched him look at it. It's not as bad as... Don't do that, he said. Same quiet, same one-word instruction as he'd given his mother. Different meaning entirely. She stopped. He looked at her face again. Really looked. And he saw for the first time, or maybe the first time, he'd allowed himself to how tired she was. Not sleepy tired. The other kind. The deep kind that lives in the set of your jaw and the way you hold your shoulders and the way your eyes are too careful, too measured, too practiced at giving nothing away. He'd seen that tired before. He'd seen it in men who'd been under pressure for too long in situations they couldn't speak about. He had never expected to see it on his wife's face inside his own house. He turned back to his mother. Go to your room, he said. Misook straightened. This is my home. I am your mother. You will not speak to me as though, go to your room. The third time he said anything, it landed differently. There was no volume to it, no heat. That was the thing about Tae-jun's anger, that people who didn't know him never understood, and people who did know him never forgot. It didn't get louder. It got quieter. It got slower. It got more specific. The men who worked for him had a saying if he raises his voice, you're fine. If he gets quiet, start praying. Misook left the kitchen. Her footsteps were very controlled down the hallway. Controlled the way you control something when you're working very hard, not to let anyone see what's happening inside you. The kitchen was quiet. Imani let out a breath. Tae-jun put his hand on the side of her face. Just briefly. He wasn't a demonstrative man. She had always known that, had understood it from the beginning, that the language he spoke was mostly physical in its smallest forms. A hand at the small of her back, a thumb against her knuckle. The specific way he positioned himself between her and a room. He pressed his palm against her cheek for 2 seconds, and then he dropped his hand and stepped back. Sit down, he said. I'm fine standing, Imani. She sat down, at the kitchen table, in the chair that had been gone for 3 days, and was inexplicably, silently back this morning. She would find out later that the kitchen assistant had snuck it back in at 5:45 when he heard the sound of an arriving car. He had known, somehow before anyone else knew, that the equilibrium of the house had just changed completely. Tae-jun sat across from her. He put his elbows on the table. He pressed his hands together in front of his mouth for a moment in a gesture she recognized. It was the gesture he made when he was deciding something, when he was taking something apart in his head to see how it was built. Then he put his hands down. How long, he said. She looked at him. She knew what he was asking. She had known this question was coming from the second she saw him in the doorway. She had spent the last 60 seconds calculating it, turning it over, measuring the gap between what she could say and what the truth was. She had spent 3 years managing that gap. The thing was, she was so tired of managing it. Almost 3 years, she said. The silence that followed was like a room changing temperature. Tae-jun's face did not move. That was the tell, actually not when his expression changed, but when it stopped changing. When everything went very still and very flat. The men who worked for him called it the mask. She had a different name for it. She called it the moment before. 3 years, he said. Yes. In my house. Yes. He stood up. He walked to the kitchen window and stood there with his back to her, looking out at the garden. It was raining still, lighter now, the first rain of the morning, thinning out into mist. She watched the set of his shoulders, the particular way he was holding himself, every muscle, deliberate, nothing loose, like a man keeping himself in a container by conscious effort alone. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. His voice was still quiet. But there was something in it now, not at her. She could tell the difference. It was something at himself. "Because I knew what you would do," she said. He turned around. His face was not quite controlled anymore. "What does that mean?" "You know what it means, Tae-jun." He looked at her for a long moment. She held his gaze. She was one of the very few people on earth who could hold his gaze when he looked like that. And he knew it. And she knew he knew it. And that fact lived between them as something complicated, part of what made them work, part of what made it hard. "I would have stopped it," he said. "Yes," she said. "I know. But how you would have stopped it, that's what I was afraid of." He didn't answer that, because she was right, and he knew she was right, and the fact that she was right was its own specific kind of wound. He had built an empire out of a particular method of stopping things. And his wife, who knew him better than anyone, had spent 3 years absorbing damage rather than trigger that method inside his family. He picked up his phone. "I need 2 hours," he said. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was dialing. "Go upstairs." I'll come up when I'm done." "Tae-jun, please." He said it like the word cost something. "Just 2 hours." She went upstairs. What happened in those 2 hours was not the explosion Mysuk had been bracing for. That was the thing that frightened her most about her son, not his temper, but his precision. The explosion would have been almost manageable. You could respond to an explosion. You could produce your own corresponding emotion, match energy, appeal to blood and history, and sacrifice. She had been doing that with difficult men her entire life, and she knew how it worked. What Tae-jun did instead was methodical. He started with the security office. The house had 17 cameras across its interior and exterior, most of them installed 3 years ago, after a specific incident involving a rival organization that he had never fully explained to anyone in the family. He went to the security office, a small room off the east corridor that the household staff largely forgot existed, and he sat down in front of the monitors with his head of house security, a man named Lim who had been with him for 8 years, and he said one sentence: "Pull everything from the last year. Internal cameras only." Krana looked at him. "Sir," he said carefully, "that's a significant amount of footage." "I know what it is," Tae-jun said. "Start with the kitchen, then the main corridor, then my wife's rooms." Lim pulled the footage. They sat there together, and they watched. Within 40 minutes, Tae-jun had seen things that he was not going to be able to unsee for the rest of his life. He watched his mother deliver a specific kind of sustained, methodical humiliation that he recognized because he had studied human behavior his entire adult life in environments where understanding how people break other people was a professional skill. The thing about Misuk's campaign was that it had been intelligent. No single incident was dramatic. Each one was calibrated to fall just below the threshold of what Imani would feel she could report. A chair removed, a meal downgraded, a look held a second too long. A sentence dropped at the precise moment to do the most interior damage. It was, if he was being clinical about it, effective. He was not being clinical about it. He watched his mother stand over Imani on the kitchen floor on 3 separate nights. On the third night 6 days ago, footage he would return to twice more before he was done, watched his mother grab Imani's wrist. He watched his wife not flinch. He watched Imani look directly at his mother with an expression that he could only describe as refusal. Not defiance. Refusal. The specific quality of a person who has decided that they will not give this thing the reaction it wants. And then he watched Imani say something he couldn't lip read and then look back down at her food. And he watched his mother hold the grip for 4 more seconds before releasing. Tae-jun paused the footage. He sat looking at the frozen frame for maybe a full minute. Lim did not say a word. Then Tae-jun said, "Pull the audio files from the last 6 months. Anywhere we have microphone coverage in common areas. Sir, some of those might include. Pull them." The audio files took another 20 minutes to organize. Tae-jun put in earphones and listened to fragments, enough to confirm what the footage had suggested, enough to fill in the scenes where the cameras couldn't capture the words. He heard his mother tell Imani, in a voice of absolute domestic authority, that the reason Tae-jun didn't bring her to certain business functions was that he was embarrassed. He heard Sua tell Imani that people in the organization found her difficult to understand, that there was a language barrier that made things awkward. He heard the kitchen assistant being told directly, without ambiguity, that his continued employment was contingent on not engaging with Mrs. Brooks Kang in any supportive capacity. He took the earphones out. He looked at Lim. Lim was a man who had seen many things in 8 years of working for Tae-jun and had learned when to show his face and when to make it neutral. Right now, his face was carefully neutral. "I need you to find me everything related to communications between this house and Park Do-won's in the last 6 months, Tae-jun said. Lim blinked. Just once. "A small tur," he said. "Do-won is your lieutenant. I know who he is." Lim started working. Tae-jun leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. He was doing the thing he did when he needed to be somewhere other than where he was, which was to take a flat surface in his line of sight and use it as a temporary container for everything that needed to be organized before he could act on it. He was thinking about a conversation he'd had 8 months ago. A comment Do-hwan had made, very casually, about the Kang family's real estate structure. Something about exposure. Something about how certain asset arrangements might create complications in restructuring. Tae-jun had filed it at the time as a professional observation. He was refiling it now. Lim put 3 folders on the desk. 6 months of communications, he said. Some of it is encrypted. Some isn't. Tae-jun opened the top folder. 45 minutes later, he put it down. He had the shape of it now. Not all the details. Not everything. But enough. Enough to understand that the abuse his wife had been absorbing inside his house for nearly 3 years had not been entirely organic. There had been someone feeding it. Someone who understood that a family's hatred of a particular person could be made useful. Someone who had come to Mi-suk with specific information, specific suggestions, specific encouragements, and who had accepted specific information in return, specifically Tae-jun's schedule, his travel patterns, his known movements. He thought about sitting in that restaurant in Busan watching Do-hwan perform Confidence. He thought about taking the first train home. He closed the folder. He stood up, and he straightened his jacket, and he said to Lim, "Nobody talks to anyone's outside house today. If anyone asks where I am, you don't know. Understood. And get me bake." Upstairs, Imani was sitting on the edge of the bed. She had been sitting on the edge of the bed for almost 90 minutes. She'd changed out of her robe. She was wearing dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater with long sleeves, both because it was cold and because the long sleeves covered her wrist. An old habit. She was holding her phone. Dara had sent 2 more messages. A meme she would normally have found funny. A question about weekend plans. Imani had not answered either. She was looking at the phone, without really seeing it. The way you look at something when your eyes need somewhere to go, while your brain is doing something else entirely. She was thinking about the question Tae-jun had asked her. Why didn't you tell me? She had answered it honestly, or at least she had given him the honest first layer, the fear of what he would do, The management of that knowledge, the calculation that had become so automatic after 3 years that she barely experienced it as calculation anymore. It had become more like breathing, something the body just did. But there was another layer she hadn't said. The other layer was this: she hadn't been sure he would believe her. Not because she thought he doubted her integrity in general, but because she knew had always known, from the moment she first met Mi-suk in Chicago at a dinner arranged with the specific purpose of discouraging the relationship, that his mother and sister were fluent in a language Imani wasn't. The language of family history, of shared reference, of decades of trust accumulated through proximity. Dix-ups, Imani said something. Mi-suk could counter it with 30 years of evidence of who she was and what her intentions were. And even though Tae-jun had always chosen Imani in the formal, declared sense, had married her, had brought her here, had defended her in public with a quiet ferocity that she genuinely loved about him, she had never been entirely certain which language his instincts spoke. She had not wanted to find out. She heard his footsteps in the hall. She set her phone down. He came in and closed the door behind him, and he stood there for a moment looking at her, and she could see immediately that something had changed in the 90 minutes since she'd come upstairs. He looked, she would struggle later to describe it, accurately consolidated. Like a man who has taken a number of loose and scattered things and arranged them into a single clear structure. There was a specific kind of calm on his face that she recognized, and it was not a reassuring kind. I watched the footage, he said. She was very still. All of it? She said. Enough. She nodded. He crossed the room and sat next to her on the edge of the bed. Not close. A foot of space between them. He sat with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped, looking at the floor. The documents, he said. The ones they asked you to sign. I didn't sign them. I know. Tell me what they said. She told him. She was precise about it. She had read them carefully. She had a good memory. She had spent 3 days going over every detail in her head. He listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Those weren't my documents, he said. The words landed quietly. But they changed the temperature of the room. I didn't think they were, she said. He looked at her. You knew, I suspected. Sua said you had. I didn't. He exhaled. Those documents would have removed your interest in 3 properties and rerouted the holdings through a secondary LSLC that I have no controlling stake in. He paused. That LLC belongs to a holding company. It takes 2 steps, but that company connects to someone in my organization. Imani looked at him. Duan, she said. It wasn't a question. Something in his expression, when he'd first mentioned the documents, the flatness had told her something. She'd filed it. He looked at her for a long moment. You knew that too, he said. I guessed, she said. He came to the house in March. You were in Tokyo. He had lunch with your mother and stayed almost 3 hours. I thought it was strange. You didn't say anything. I didn't have proof. And she stopped. And what? And I thought, if I started making accusations about your lieutenant with no proof, your mother would use it. Would say I was trying to create problems in your organization. Was trying to isolate you. She looked at her hands. She'd said things like that before. That I was trying to separate you from the people around you. Tae-jun was very quiet. She said that to you, he said. Multiple times. He stood up. He walked to the window. The same gesture as downstairs, the same effort of containment. Outside, the rain had mostly stopped. The garden was wet and gray and very still. Imani, he said. He was still facing the window. I need you to understand something. She waited. He turned around. I'm going to need 2 more days, he said. Before I do anything. Before anything happens. I need to. There are things I have to arrange. People I have to place. Before I can move on any of this. Do you understand what I'm telling you? She understood exactly what he was telling her. You're telling me to stay in this house for 2 more days with your mother, she said. She won't come near you. I'll make that clear. Tae-jun. 2 days, he said. After that, everything changes. But if I move too fast and I miss something, if Do-hwan gets any kind of warning, we lose the advantage. And I'm not. He stopped. The muscle in his jaw moved. I am not letting him get away with this. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, I've stayed in this house for 3 years. I can stay 2 more days. Something crossed his face that she didn't have a precise name for. Pain was too simple. Gratitude was too small. It was something in between, something that looked like a man accounting for a debt he can't immediately repay. He came back across the room and sat next to her again. Closer this time. He took her hand carefully, the unbruised one, and held it. They sat there in the quiet. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten, the rain gray going slowly toward a thin, reluctant morning. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face changed. He answered it and listened for 14 seconds without speaking, and then he said, "When?" Listened again. Said, "Don't touch anything. I'm coming down." He hung up. He stood up. "What is it?" Imani asked. Tae-jun looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before in 3 years of marriage. She would spend a long time afterward trying to name it. The closest she could get was this. It was the face of a man who has just discovered that the thing he thought was the worst of it was not, in fact, the worst of it. "They found another file," he said, "in Do-hwan's communications." "What kind of file?" He was already moving toward the door. "The kind that tells me this started before you came to Seoul," he said. He left the room. The door didn't close all the way behind him, and in the silence that followed, Imani sat on the edge of the bed and listened to his footsteps go down the hall, and then down the stairs. And she pressed her thumb against the bruise on her wrist, that small mean pulse, that clock, and she thought, "Before I came to Seoul," which meant this had never been about her, which meant she had spent 3 years believing she was the cause of something she had actually just been the instrument of. The thought sat in her chest like a stone. She stood up, went to the window, and looked out at the wet garden below. The morning was coming whether anyone was ready for it or not. Thin light, gray and reluctant, spreading itself across the stone paths and the bare-trimmed hedges and the wet gravel of the drive. Downstairs, a door closed hard, not slammed, controlled. The specific sound of a man who has made a decision he is not going to walk back from. Imani pressed her palm flat against the cold window glass. She could feel the shape of the next 2 days from here, the way you feel weather before it arrives, not the details, just the pressure of it. The sense of something large and inevitable moving toward everything she had known for 3 years and prepared to remake it into something unrecognizable. She was not afraid. She was, for the first time in a very long time, something closer to ready. The file was not a long document. That was the first thing Tae-jun noticed when Lim placed it on the desk in the security office. It was thin, maybe 12 pages, printed, some of it handwritten in margins, some of it scanned from what looked like original correspondence. The kind of file that doesn't need to be long because every page is doing significant damage. Lim stood back. Baek stood near the door with his arms at his sides, looking at the wall, the way security men look at walls when they need to be in a room, but also need to not be in it. Tae-jun picked up the first page. He read it standing up. He read the second page the same way. By the third page, he had pulled the chair out and sat down, not because he needed to, but because something in his legs had made a quiet executive decision that standing was no longer the appropriate posture for what he was reading. The file was a correspondence record. Emails, mostly, some of them printed from an account he didn't recognize, some of them from a secondary account. He did a business address connected to a shell company in the Kang organization's outer ring that he had always understood to be dormant. The emails spanned 2 years. They began 18 months before Imani had come to Seoul. The other party in the correspondence was Park Do-hwan. Tae-jun read for 11 minutes without speaking. When he finished the last page, he set the file down on the desk and pressed both palms flat against the surface and looked at the middle distance for a moment. Then he said, "Who else has seen this?" "Only me," Lim said. "And whoever compiled it on Do-hwan's end. How did we get it?" "It came from the communications sweep you ordered last night. One of the encrypted channels we cracked this morning. It was a backup archive Do-hwan, kept on a secondary server. He thought it was isolated from our network. It wasn't." Lim paused. "He may not know we have it." "He doesn't," Tae-jun said. "He would have moved differently this morning if he did." He looked at the file again. The correspondence told a specific and detailed story. 18 months before Imani arrived in Seoul, Du-hwan had made contact with someone inside the Kang family. Not Mi-suk, not yet. Someone else. A financial advisor connected to the family's legitimate holdings. A man named Choi, who had been with the Kang estate for 9 years, and whom Tae-jun had always considered peripheral and loyal by default, the way you consider furniture loyal. Choi had provided Du-hwan with a structural analysis of the Kang organization's asset distribution, specifically the properties and holdings that were affected by a change in Tae-jun's personal circumstances. Marriage, heirs, transfer of interest. The analysis was dry and professional and thorough, and it had been delivered to Du-hwan as though it were a consulting document, which it technically was, except that Choi had no authorization to produce it, and Du-hwan had no legitimate reason to receive it. What Du-hwan had done with that analysis was the part that sat in Tae-jun's chest like a coal. He had used it to build a case, not a legal case, a persuasion case. A document designed to be shown to someone specific, someone who would be receptive to a particular argument, that Tae-jun's marriage to a foreign woman with no family connections, no organizational value, and no cultural standing within the Korean business world would structurally weaken the Kang Empire. That the assets being transferred into her name represented a vulnerability. That a woman the family already distrusted was being positioned, intentionally or not, to drain resources from the legitimate Kang structure into a personal holding that could, under certain circumstances, be leveraged against the organization. The document was designed to be shown to Mi-suk, and the correspondence confirmed that it had been. Tae-jun picked up the third page again and read a single paragraph. In the paragraph, Du-hwan wrote in language that was professionally careful but unmistakable in its intent that Mi-suk's cooperation in maintaining pressure on the foreign wife would serve both their interests. That a woman made sufficiently uncomfortable would eventually leave. That a man whose marriage had failed would be structurally and emotionally weakened at a specific moment Du-hwan was already planning for. That the family's natural distrust of an outsider was an asset to be cultivated, not resolved. He had not started the hatred. He had found it and fed it and made it into a tool. Tae-jun set the page down. The thing that he felt in this moment was not clean enough to be called anger. Anger had a direction, a heat, a forward momentum. What he felt was something that had no clean direction, because it was pointing at too many things simultaneously at Du-hwan, at Choi, at his mother, at himself, and at the specific and terrible geography of the last 3 years of his wife's life inside this house. The combination of those directions was not anger. It was something more like the experience of a structure failing, a load-bearing thing giving way. He stood up. "Get me Choi," he said. Lim went still. "Sir, Choi has been with the family for. I know how long he's been here." Tae-jun straightened his jacket. "Get him." Choi Young-min was 51 years old and had the particular coloring of a man who has spent the better part of 2 decades indoors managing numbers. He was soft-spoken, slightly round, and possessed of the careful manners of someone who has built a professional life on being found unthreatening. He arrived at the security office 11 minutes after Lim's call, and when he walked in and saw Tae-jun sitting at the desk and the file open on the surface in front of him, something happened to his face that he was not fast enough to control. It was fast, half a second, but Tae-jun saw it. "Sit down," Tae-jun said. Choi sat. He folded his hands on his knee. He was working very hard on his expression. "I'm going to ask you one question," Tae-jun said. "And I want you to think carefully before you answer it, because the answer determines what happens next, and the answer is going to take me about 4 seconds to verify against what's already in this file." Choi looked at the file, then back at Tae-jun. "When Du-hwan contacted you 2 years ago, Tae-jun said, 'Did you go to him or did he come to you?'" The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then Choi said, "He came to me." "With what?" He said it was an internal audit request. "From your office." Choi's hands tightened on his knee. He had documentation. It looked official. "I had no reason to." "You produced a full asset distribution analysis of my personal holdings," Tae-jun said. "That requires my signature or my direct verbal authorization." "You had neither." He said you had approved it verbally. He said, "Did you call my office to confirm?" The pause was its own answer. "No," Choi said. Tae-jun looked at him for a long moment. Did you know what he was going to do with it? He said. Something shifted in Choi's expression. A decision being made. A direction being chosen. Not at first, Choi said. But eventually. Choi looked at the file on the desk. Then back at his hands. He came back 6 months later, Choi said quietly. He told me what he was doing. He said it was for the good of the organization. That she was an external variable that created risk. He paused. He said if I said anything, he would tell you. I had produced the analysis voluntarily. For money. That I had sold organizational intelligence. And would that have been true? No, a beat. He offered me money. I declined, but I had already produced the document. So he had leverage, yes. Tae-jun was quiet for a moment. And for 2 years, he said, while a campaign was being run against my wife, inside my own house, a campaign that you knew was operating on information, you said nothing. Choi's jaw moved. His hands had gone very tight. I'm sorry, he said. I know, Tae-jun said. He said it without warmth or bitterness, simply as an acknowledgement of a fact. He stood up. Lim will explain what happens next. He walked out of the security office. In the hallway, he stopped. He stood against the wall, with his eyes closed for approximately 15 seconds. He was thinking about something specific. He was thinking about the night he had told his mother about Imani, not asked her permission. He had never asked his mother permission for anything since he was 19 years old, but told her in the formal and final way of a decision already made. He was thinking about his mother's face in that moment, the particular set of her mouth, the way she had said after a very long pause, I see. Just that, I see. He had read that I see as reluctant acceptance. He understood now it had been the beginning of a strategy. And he understood this was the part he was going to have to sit with, the part that was going to cost something beyond the immediate situation that his mother's strategy had worked, as well as it had because he had cooperated with it. Not deliberately, not knowingly. But he had cooperated with it every time he'd left for Busan, every time he'd taken Doowan's word for something without cross-checking, every time he'd told himself that Imani was adjusting, that the family was difficult but not impossible, that things would improve once everyone settled in. He had cooperated with it every time he chose to believe the version of his household that was comfortable over the evidence that something was wrong. He opened his eyes. He pushed off the wall and walked toward the main staircase. Mi-suk was in her study. She had been there since leaving the kitchen that morning. She had not eaten breakfast. She had not called anyone, which was itself a form of discipline. Her first instinct had been to call her sister, then her personal lawyer, then a woman she had known for 30 years who understood the specific mechanics of managing powerful sons. She had resisted all 3 instincts. Because she was 62 years old, and she had not survived the various difficulties of her life by acting on first instincts. She was sitting at her desk when Tae-jun came in. He did not knock. He had never knocked on her study door. In his life, it had always been a point between them, a small declaration of the architecture of the family, that this house belonged to him in some foundational way, regardless of whose history was in it. He came in, and he closed the door, and he stood in the middle of the room, and he looked at her. She looked back at him. I've seen the footage, he said. I know, she said. I've read Duhwan's files. Something moved in her eyes. Very fast. What files? The correspondence. The asset analysis. The plan. He let a beat of silence sit between those words. All of it. Mi-suk was very still. I want you to tell me, he said. When Duhwan first came to you. What he said, what he offered, Tae-jun. She put her hands flat on the desk. Her voice was steady. This was the thing about Mi-suk that was genuinely formidable. Her steadiness as under pressure was not performance. It was structural. She had been steady in genuinely terrible moments her entire life. Whatever that man told you about me. He didn't tell me anything, Tae-jun said. His own files told me. He kept records, Amma. Detailed ones. With dates and amounts, and the specific things you said to him in return for the information he was giving you about my movements. The word Amma, the Korean word for mother, the informal one, the one children use in his mouth, in that moment had a specific quality. It was not tender. It was precise. It was the word you use when you want the person across from you, to understand that you remember who you are to each other, and you are still saying this anyway. Mai Suk's composure held, but something in her posture shifted. A fraction. The kind of fraction you only catch if you are watching for it, and Tae-jun was always watching. He approached me, she said finally, over a year ago. He said he was concerned about the structural implications of your marriage on the organization. He said the foreign woman. Her name, Tae-jun said. Mai Suk's mouth closed. Say her name. Quiet. Exact. Imani. Mi Suk said it like a word in a language she distrusted. He said Imani was creating a vulnerability, that her asset interests represented a risk if the marriage became. What did he ask you for? She held his gaze for a moment. Then your schedule, when you were traveling, when you would be absent for extended periods. And what did he give you? She stopped. What did he give you, Alma? Her chin lifted slightly. He gave me support, for what I was already for the concerns I already had. He confirmed that those concerns were not irrational. He validated your hatred, Tae-jun said, so that you would give him operational information about my movements, which he used to plan a takeover of my organization, while making sure my wife was too miserable and too afraid to tell me what was happening in my own house. Mai Suk's breath came out in a short, controlled exhalation. I did not know the full extent of. You knew enough, he said. You knew you were giving him information about me. You knew what you were doing to her. You chose to do both. I was protecting this family. Her voice was rising, now just slightly. The first crack in the composure. Everything I did, every decision I made, was for this family. For what your father built. For what you inherited. That woman does not understand this world. She does not understand what it costs. She does not understand. She understood enough to spend 3 years protecting you from me, Tae-jun said. Mai Suk stopped. She knew what I would do if I found out, he said. She was afraid of what I would do to my own family. So she said nothing. She ate whatever you put in front of her and sat wherever you told her to sit and kept your secrets inside this house because she was trying to hold something together that you were dismantling from the inside. He looked at his mother with an expression she had not seen on his face before. The woman you spent 3 years trying to break was the reason this family still had anything left to protect. The study was very quiet. Outside, somewhere in the house, a door opened and closed. Mai Suk's composure was still there, but the architecture of it had changed. She was holding it up now in a way she hadn't been when she came into the room. The difference was visible if you knew what to look for. What are you going to do, she said. Her voice was controlled. Careful. Today, Tae-jun said nothing. I have other things to manage first. And after, he looked at her for a long, steady moment. I'll let you know, he said. He left the study. It was Sua who fell apart first. That surprised him slightly. He had expected Sua to hold. She was in certain ways better constructed for sustained pressure than Mi Suk, younger, more adaptable, less invested in a particular self-image. But he found her in the second-floor sitting room at 11 that morning, and she was pacing, which Sua never did. And when she heard him come in, she turned with an expression that was doing too many things at once. Appa, she said. He looked at her. I need you to understand, she said. Her voice was tight. I need you to understand that I didn't know what Du-hwan was really doing. I thought Amma told me it was a business matter, that you had approved. What specifically did you do? He said. She stopped pacing. What did you do? He said again. He said it the way you repeat a question when you already know the answer, and you're giving the person a chance to be honest about it first. Sua's hands came together in front of her, a childlike gesture. She had done it as a small girl when she was caught in something she couldn't talk her way out of. He noticed it now the way you notice a thing you haven't seen in a long time and suddenly understand differently than you did then. He asked me to let him know, she said, when you changed your plans. When you were coming home early or late, he said he needed to coordinate. You told Du-hwan I was coming home early, Tae-jun said. Sua's face went pale. What, she said. Last night, he said. I called Baek from Busan at 10 o'clock. Baek is loyal. But the line went through the house relay. Did you monitor the house relay? I never, she was shaking her head. I didn't tell him last night. I swear to you. I haven't spoken to him in 3 weeks. He said he told me to keep distance, that things were getting complicated. He told you to keep distance 3 weeks ago. Yes. Tae-jun filed this. 3 weeks ago was approximately when the documents had been presented to Imani. Do-hwan had started pulling his pieces back before Tae-jun had registered anything was wrong, which meant Do-hwan had a better sense of the timeline than Tae-jun had given him credit for. Sua, he said, look at me. She looked at him. Did you know what was in those documents you gave Imani to sign? Her mouth opened, closed. The color in her face was doing something complex. I thought they were what Amma said, she said. A restructuring. I thought you'd read them? I parts of them. And did you understand what they did? She was crying now. Not dramatically, a specific quiet kind of crying, the kind that happens when a thing you have managed to keep at a certain distance is suddenly very close. I thought it would make things simpler, she said. I thought if her name wasn't on those properties, if there's more separation, I thought it would be better for the organization. And I thought maybe she would decide it was easier to... She stopped. To leave, Tae-jun said. Sua pressed her hand against her mouth. He stood there looking at his sister for a moment. He had known her for 27 years. He had taught her to ride a bicycle in the driveway of this house. He had paid her university tuition and attended her graduation and called her twice a week for a decade. He looked at her now, and he felt the specific grief of recognizing that someone you love is capable of things you didn't adequately account for, and that the failure of that accounting had costs that someone else paid. Go to your room, he said. Oppa, I'm not going to have this conversation right now, he said. Go. She went. At 1 o'clock, Tae-jun's phone rang with a number he had been waiting for. He answered on the first ring. The voice on the other end belonged to a man named Yoon, who worked in a part of Tae-jun's organization that had no formal name and whose operational details would not survive a description in polite company. Yoon had been running a parallel surveillance on Do-hwan's movements for the past 18 hours. He's moving, Yoon said. Where? He pulled 2 of his personal security team this morning. The ones not on your payroll. He rerouted 3 financial instruments through a Macau clearinghouse about an hour ago. Fast movements, the kind you make when you're preparing to be somewhere else. A pause. He had a call this morning from an unknown number. We traced it to a burner registered in Incheon. The call lasted 4 minutes. Tae-jun was quiet. He knows, he said. Looks that way. How? We don't know yet. Another pause. He may have a contact inside the house. Someone who's not Lim. Someone we haven't. Who made calls from inside this house this morning, Tae-jun said. He heard Yoon pulling something up. Keys, screens. 4 calls from household lines, Yoon said. 2 from the kitchen staff. 1 from an exterior line near the garden entrance. He stopped. And the 4th, Tae-jun said. The 4th was from the second-floor sitting room, Yoon said. At 10:47 this morning. Duration 38 seconds. To a number that routes through a relay in Mappo, Tae-jun closed his eyes. 10:47. He had been in his mother's study until 10:35. He had gone to see Sua at 11. The window between those 2 things was 25 minutes. Sua had told him she hadn't spoken to Do-hwan in 3 weeks. She had made the call at 10:47. He opened his eyes. Yoon, he said. Sir. Changed the timeline. His voice was very flat now. Everything moves tonight. Tonight. Yoon's voice sharpened. Sirs, the gala isn't until Friday. We plan to. I know when the gala is. He was already moving, already walking, already calculating. We're not waiting for the gala. He's running. If he gets to the Macau connections before we lock those instruments, we lose the financial evidence, Yoon said. And without it, the legal package is... I know what it is. Tae-jun pushed through the door of the east corridor and walked toward the main staircase. Get the legal team. Call Jisoo at the corporate office. He knows which authorities to contact and how to do it without triggering a response before we're ready. He was taking the stairs 2 at a time. Everything happens tonight, not in pieces. All of it. Understood. A pause, and Do-hwan himself. He comes to me, Tae-jun said. I'll make sure of it. He hung up. He was at the top of the stairs now, and he stopped on the landing, and he stood there for a moment with his hand on the banister thinking about Sua in that sitting room making a 38-second call. And he thought about Du Huan rerouting instruments through Macau, and he thought about a file 12 pages long that documented 18 months of methodical manipulation. And he thought about a bruise, the color of deep water on his wife's wrist, and something in him that had been attempting to hold its various tensions in a controlled arrangement, gave up attempting. He went to the bedroom. Imani was at the window. She turned when he came in. She read his face the way she always read his face, quickly, precisely, without asking him to explain the grammar. "It changed," she said. "We moved tonight," he said. She nodded, no questions, no protest. He crossed the room and stood in front of her, and he looked at her for a moment, this woman who had spent 3 years being quiet in order to protect people who were hurting her. And he said, "I need you to trust me for a few more hours." "I've been trusting you," she said, "for 3 years." The word hit him the way she probably intended it to, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact, which was somehow worse. It was the truest thing in the room. She had been trusting him across the distance of his absence, through all the things she hadn't said, through 3 years of cold rice, and missing chairs and bruises under long sleeves. He had not been worth it. He was going to try tonight to begin being worth it. "Stay in this room," he said. "Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me or Beck. Tae-jun." She put her hand on his arm briefly. "Be careful." He looked at her hand on his arm. Then he left. Downstairs, in the east corridor, Beck was already waiting. Behind him, 2 of Tae-jun's most trusted security men stood in the hallway with the particular quality of stillness that meant they had already been briefed and were already ready. Tae-jun straightened his jacket. "The dinner is tonight," he said. "Call everyone in, every senior member. I want them in this house by 8 o'clock. He looked at Beck. "And make sure Du Huan gets his invitation personally." Beck nodded. He started to turn. "Beck," Tae-jun said. He stopped. "Check every phone that made a call from this house today," Tae-jun said. "Every single one. Whoever made the call to Du Huan at 10:47, I want them accounted for before tonight." Beck looked at him steadily. "And if it's someone inside the immediate family." Tae-jun looked down the hallway toward the main corridor of the house he had grown up in, the house his father had built and handed to him, and that he had spent 14 years, believing was something solid under his feet. "Then they'll be in the room tonight with everyone else," he said, "and they'll watch what happens when you build your house on someone else's pain." He walked down the hallway. Behind him, the sound of his footsteps was the only sound in the house, and it was very. The invitation went out at 2 in the afternoon, not by phone, by hand. Beck sent 3 men to deliver physical envelopes to each of the 12 senior members of the Kang organization, and each envelope contained a single card with the Kang family crest embossed at the top, and 8 words printed below it in Tae-jun's preferred typeface. "Dinner. The Songbuk-dong residence. 8 o'clock. Attendance required. No explanation, no context. Just the crest and the time and the word required, which in the language of the Kang organization meant exactly what it said." Du Huan's envelope was delivered to his apartment in Mapo by one of Beck's men at 2:15. The man who delivered it reported back that Du Huan had read the card twice, said nothing, and closed the door. At 2:19, Du Huan made a phone call. Yoon's team picked it up. The call lasted 90 seconds and went to one of the relay numbers that it's been tracking. The content was 3 sentences, spoken quickly, in a lowered voice, that tonight was happening, that he needed the Eastern vehicle ready, and that the documents needed to move before 10 o'clock. Tae-jun listened to the recording in the security office at 2:40. He listened to it once. Then he told Yoon to freeze the Macau instruments. Yoon said, "If we freeze them now, he'll know we have access." "He already knows something's wrong," Tae-jun said. "He's been knowing since this morning. I want those instruments frozen before he can move them, and I want it done in the next 30 minutes. Yoon moved. The freeze went through at 3:08. At 3:14, Du Huan called the Macau number, and the call did not connect. And in the apartment in Mapo, A man who had spent 4 years watching and measuring and waiting, looked at his phone and understood that the room he had been standing in for 4 years had just changed shape entirely around him. Tae-jun wasn't watching that happen. He was upstairs. He knocked on Imani's door 2 knocks, then 1, the signal they'd agreed on, and she let him in, and he came into the bedroom and he stood there for a moment. In the quiet of it, the cedar and citrus smell of her candle, the worn paperbacks on the dresser, the photographs of her family from Chicago, and something in him that had been running at a very high operational frequency for the past 8 hours downshifted slightly. Not all the way, not enough to lose focus, but enough to let him stand in the room and be a person rather than a mechanism. "How are you doing?" he said. She was sitting in the chair near the window. She looked at him with an expression that was measuring him, the way she always measured him, not his position in any room, not his power, not the version of him that the rest of the world calibrated itself around, but the actual condition of the actual person. "I'm fine," she said. "How are you doing?" He almost said fine back. "I've been better," he said instead. She nodded. She accepted that the way she accepted most things directly, without making it into something it didn't need to be. "Tonight," she said. "Tell me what's happening tonight." He told her. Not everything, not the operational details, not the specifics of what Yoon's team was doing, or exactly how the legal package was structured, but the shape of it, the dinner, the screen, the footage, the plan to present everything in front of every senior member of the organization simultaneously, so that nothing could be rewritten or reframed afterward, so that every person in that room would see the same truth at the same moment, and there would be no version of events that Do-hwan could offer afterward that would have any purchase. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "And your mother? She'll be there. And Sua?" "Yes." Imani looked at the window for a moment. The afternoon light was coming in at a low angle, the kind of mid-afternoon soul light in late autumn that has no warmth to it, just clarity. "She called him," Imani said, "this morning. Didn't she?" He looked at her. "I heard her on the phone," Imani said. "Through the sitting room wall. I didn't hear what she said. But I heard the voice she uses when she's scared and covering it." She paused. "She's done it before. When Do-won visited in March. After he left, she made a call I wasn't supposed to know about." "You heard that too, yes." Tae-jun looked at his wife sitting in the afternoon light and thought about all the things she had heard and seen and filed and said nothing about, and thought about the specific kind of intelligence that required not cleverness, but patience. The slow accumulation of evidence in an environment where presenting that evidence prematurely was more dangerous than holding it. "You would have been good at my job," he said. Something crossed her face that was almost a smile. "I've been doing your job," she said. "Just the part you didn't know needed doing." He sat down on the edge of the bed. "I need you to be in the room tonight," he said. She looked at him. "At the dinner," he said. "I need you there. Not behind a door somewhere while it happens. In the room," he held her gaze. "Because what's on that footage, what they did it, only means what it means if you're standing in front of the people who need to understand it." She was quiet for a moment. "You're asking me to sit in a room with the people who've been hurting me," she said, "while you show them footage of it happening." "Yes. And Do-won, he'll be there." She looked at him for a long time. "Okay," she said. He exhaled. "Imani, don't," she said. Not unkindly. "Don't apologize again right now. We can do that later. Right now, just tell me what you need me to do, and I'll do it." He nodded. He left her to get ready and went back downstairs, and the house began its preparation in the particular way that the Kang mansion prepared for formal events, the staff moving with a specific efficiency, the dining table extended to its full length, the good china brought out, the lighting adjusted in the main rooms. From the outside, if you didn't know what was happening, it would have looked like any other Kang family dinner. The doors were checked at 4 o'clock, every exit, every entrance, every secondary corridor. Tae-jun walked the perimeter himself with Baek, not because he didn't trust Baek's people, but because he needed to know the geography with his own body before tonight. He needed to know which door took 11 seconds to reach from the head of the table, and which hallway connected the east wing to the kitchen, and where the blind spots were. He found two he hadn't accounted for. He put people in them. By 5:30, the legal documents were finalized and transmitted to three separate contacts in the prosecutor's office through the firm of the Kang organization's corporate lawyers, men who operated in the legitimate world and who had been given, this afternoon, a package of evidence they had not expected and had taken 30 minutes to process before calling Tae-jun back to confirm receipt. The confirmation came at 5:42. At 6 o'clock, Tae-jun changed into a dark suit. He stood in front of the mirror in the bedroom, and his hands worked the tie with the automatic precision of a gesture ditcher he'd performed thousands of times. And he looked at his own face in the mirror with the flat, assessing gaze of someone taking inventory. Behind him, Imani came out of the bathroom. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress he hadn't seen before, not new. He could tell, worn in around the waist, and hem in the way of something that had been loved for a while. And her hair was up, and she was putting on earrings with the focused attention of someone who has decided that if they are going to walk into a room, they are going to walk into it on their own terms. She looked standing in the middle of the bedroom, with her chin slightly raised while she worked the second earring, like someone who had made a very clear internal decision. He watched her in the mirror. "What?" she said without looking up. "Nothing," he said. She glanced at him. She looked back at the earring. "Stop looking at me like that." "Like what?" "Like, you're worried about me." She finished with the earring and met his eyes in the mirror. "I'm not the one you should be worried about tonight." The guests arrived between 7:40 and 8. 12 senior members of the Kang organization, plus their direct seconds in some cases, plus the three family members Mi-suk, Soo-ah, and an uncle named Kang Byung-soo, who was 70 years old and had been the family's connection to their original legitimate shipping business, and who had been invited specifically because was the one person in the family structure whose presence signaled to everyone else that this was a Kang family matter in the fullest sense. Doohwan arrived at 8:03. He arrived alone, which surprised two people and surprised nobody else. He was wearing a gray suit, and he had the specific quality of stillness that Tae-jun recognized as controlled fear, performing itself as confidence. He shook hands in the entry hall. He made brief eye contact with two of his remaining loyalists in the room, and something passed between them in those glances that Tae-jun, watching from the edge of the hallway, clocked and filed. Doohwan looked across the entry hall and saw Tae-jun. He smiled. It was a genuinely impressive smile, the kind that a man produces when every alternative to smiling is worse and he is committed to the performance. "Tae-jun," he said. He crossed the hall and extended his hand. Tae-jun shook it. "Doohwan," he said. "Glad you could make it." Of course. Doohwan held the handshake one beat longer than necessary. His eyes were doing their job, trying to read the room, trying to find the shape of what was waiting. "Interesting timing for a dinner. I like to keep things interesting," Tae-jun said. They went into the dining room. The table was set for 22. Every seat filled. The overhead lights were slightly lower than usual, and at the far end of the room positioned, where no one had positioned anything before, mounted on a temporary bracket that had been installed that afternoon by two of Lim's men, was a large screen. Dark, currently, waiting. The room noticed the screen. Nobody said anything about it. The first course was served. The conversation was the particular strained variety of conversation that happens when everyone in a room is waiting for something, and nobody is willing to be the person who asks what it is. Tae-jun ate. He answered questions with the minimum required words. He watched Doohwan across the table work through his appetizer with the mechanical efficiency of a man forcing himself to appear normal and not entirely managing it. Imani sat to Tae-jun's left. She ate. She spoke when she was spoken to, which was not often, because most of the people at this table had never quite learned how to speak to her naturally, some from discomfort, some from the specific social mathematics of the Kang world, some because they had absorbed Mi-suk's positioning of her over 3 years without realizing they had absorbed it. She didn't perform ease. She didn't perform anything. She simply sat there and ate, and occasionally Tae-jun's hand would move under the table, and his fingers would briefly touch the back of her hand, and she would not react visibly, but he could feel the steadiness of her. Mi-suk sat 6 seats away. She had not looked at Imani since they'd come into the room. She was managing the dinner the way she managed all things, with a composed surface and considerable internal activity. She was working something out. Tae-jun could see it in the way she handled her chopsticks, in the way her gaze moved around the room without settling on anything for long. She looked at the screen twice. She looked at Tae-jun once, and he looked back at her, and something moved between them that had no words in any language either of them spoke. She looked at her plate. The second course was cleared. Tae-jun set down his chopsticks. He looked at Baek, who was standing near the east corridor entrance. Baek nodded once. The doors of the dining room closed. The sound of the locks engaging was very quiet, barely audible. But several people heard it, and the conversation, which had been strained, went to nothing at all. Tae-jun stood up. The room watched him. "I called this dinner," he said, "because I have something to show you." He kept his voice level and unhurried, the way you speak when you have nothing to prove about the information you're about to present, because the information proves itself. "This will take about 20 minutes. After that, we'll talk. But first, you're going to watch." He looked at Lim, who was positioned near the screen. The screen came on. It started with the kitchen footage. He had chosen the order carefully, not chronologically, that would have been overwhelming. 3 years of material compressed into something the mind couldn't fully process in real time. Instead, he had chosen representative footage, the clearest examples. The moments where intent was unmistakable and behavior was unambiguous. 3 minutes of Mi-suk in the kitchen, 2 minutes of Soo-ah in the second floor, 90 seconds of the household assistant being threatened, the asset documents being presented, the wrist. He had cut the footage to the wrist. The bruise in close-up was on the screen for 6 seconds. The room was completely silent. Nobody moved. Do-hwan was looking at the screen with an expression that was performing shock well enough to fool someone who didn't know what his face looked like when he was actually surprised. Tae-jun knew what Do-hwan's face looked like when he was actually surprised. This wasn't it. Then Lim switched the footage. The second sequence was a correspondence. Key emails, formatted for readability, displayed in sequence. Do-hwan's name at the top of each one, the dates, the asset analysis request, the conversations with Choi, the specific emails to Mi-suk, her responses, brief, cautious but present, unmistakable. The room's silence changed quality. It went from the silence of people watching something uncomfortable to the silence of people recalculating every assumption they'd held for the last several years. One of the senior members, a man named Han, who ran the Northern Logistics operation and who had worked with Tae-jun for 9 years, turned his head very slowly and looked at Do-hwan. Do-hwan did not look back at Han. He was looking at the screen. Then Lim put up the financial documentation, the rerouted instruments, the Macau accounts, the shell structure that connected, in 3 steps but unmistakably, to a holding company that had been established 9 months ago in anticipation of a leadership transition in the Kang organization that Do-hwan had planned to precipitate himself. The room understood what it was looking at now. Not everyone simultaneously. But the understanding moved around the table with a specific and visible momentum, person to person, and the faces it touched changed in specific ways: calculation, anger, the specific discomfort of people who realize they have been used as scenery in someone else's plan. Mi-suk was very still. She was looking at the financial documents on the screen. She was looking at them with the expression of someone who has just discovered that the person they made an alliance with was not running the operation they believed they were part of. Do-hwan's loyalists in the room, 2 of them, seated separately, not together, which had been deliberate, were both looking at the table in front of them. Tae-jun watched all of it. He let the screen run for another 90 seconds. Let the full financial structure sit in front of the room, long enough for everyone to process its architecture. Then he nodded at Lim, and the screen went dark. He stood at the head of the table. "My mother and sister will be addressed separately," he said. "That's a family matter, and it will be handled as one." He looked across the table at Mi-suk when he said it. His voice did not change. What happened to my wife inside this house was not a family matter in the way they believed it was. It was a mechanism. It was designed and exploited by someone in this organization who believed that a weakened man was easier to replace than a strong one. He looked at DeJuan. DeJuan looked back. The financial instruments were frozen at 3:08 this afternoon. Tae-jun said. The legal package was transmitted to the prosecutor's office at 5:42. The accounts connected to the Macau structure are inaccessible as of 1 hour ago. He paused. You're not leaving this building tonight with anything you came in with. Duwand was quiet for a moment. Then something in his face changed. The performing stopped. What was underneath the performing was a face that Tae-jun had always known was there, but had never quite seen in its full form, a face without the management, without the professional warmth, without the 4 years of practiced loyalty. It was a harder face, older, more honest in its hardness than anything Du-hwan had shown him before. You think this ends it, Du-hwan said. His voice was calm. Still controlled, but a different kind of controlled, not performing now, just contained. It ends your part of it, Tae-jun said. You froze accounts, Du-hwan said. You have correspondence. You have camera footage. He looked around the table not nervously, not as an appeal, just as a deliberate gesture of acknowledgement, like a man taking stock. You have a room full of people who are going to recalculate whether they want to be standing next to you when everything you've been managing falls apart. He looked back at Tae-jun. Because you've been managing, Tae-jun, for years. You've been managing a structure that was already stressed before I touched it. I didn't build the weakness in this organization. I just found it. You built plenty, Tae-jun said. I built an alternative, Du-hwan said. Because the original was running on borrowed time, and you were too invested in the idea of yourself to see it. He spread his hands slightly. The foreign wife, the legitimate business push, the pullback from the operations that keep this structure solvent. You've been trying to become something this world doesn't have room for, and the people around you, your own family, could see it. My family was being manipulated by you, Tae-jun said. Your family was afraid, Du-hwan said. I gave them a direction for it. That's not the same thing as manipulation. That's leadership. The room was very still. Du-hwan looked down the table at Imani. She's not wrong for who she is, he said. He said it with a specificity that was more insulting than anything cruder would have been, the tone of a man explaining something obvious to someone who should have understood it earlier. She's wrong for what you're supposed to be. Your family knew that. Most of this room knows it. You just needed someone to say it. Imani's face did not change. Tae-jun stepped around the corner of the table. He moved toward Du-hwan with a slowness that was more alarming than speed would have been, and Du-hwan started to rise. And then Baek was behind him, and 2 of Tae-jun's men were at his sides, and the chair Du-hwan had been in the process of standing from was pressed back down, and Du-hwan was in it. The 2 loyalists across the table didn't move. They looked at the men standing behind them and made the calculation that men in their position make, when the calculation is not particularly complex. They didn't move. Tae-jun stood in front of Do-hwan. He looked at him for a moment. Then he stepped back. He walked back to the head of the table. He stood behind his chair with his hand on the back of it, and he looked at the room. Every face, every person. The senior members and their seconds and his uncle Byung-soo, who was 70 years old and had not spoken since the screen came on. Mi-suk, whose composure was intact, but whose hands in her lap were doing something he couldn't quite see from here. Sua, who was not crying now, but looked like a person who had been crying and had decided it was finished. Imani, to his left, whose face was absolutely steady. My mother taught me, he said, that blood makes a family. He looked at Mi-suk. She held his gaze. She taught me that the people in your blood are the ones you protect, regardless of what they cost you. That loyalty runs through lineage. That the people outside it, the ones who marry into it, the ones who come from somewhere else, they have to earn what your blood gets automatically. He paused. She was wrong, he said. Mi-suk's composure shifted. Just at the edges. Tae-jun looked at Imani. She taught me something my mother didn't, he said. She taught me that the person who stays quiet to protect you, even when the staying quiet is costing them everything that's loyalty. That's not weakness. That's the thing I should have been looking for my whole life, and didn't know to look for, because I thought loyalty was supposed to look like strength. The room was absolutely quiet. She survived 3 years in this house, he said, without becoming the thing that was being done to her. Without asking me to burn anything down. He looked around the table. That's the strongest person in this room. And she's been sitting at the edge of this table for 3 years, while everyone failed to see it. He straightened. Du Huan will be turned over to the authorities tonight, he said. The legal documentation is already with the prosecutor's office. The financial instruments are frozen. His associates in this room, he looked at the 2 loyalists without naming them, will have until midnight to decide whether they want to be cooperative. He moved his gaze around the table one more time. Everyone else, this organization has a future. What it looked like last week is not what it looks like from tomorrow. Those of you who want to be part of what it becomes, you'll hear from me. He picked up his chopsticks. Dinner isn't finished. He sat down. The room didn't immediately begin talking. People needed a moment. The human brain, when it has been handed an enormous amount of information and emotion, sex simultaneously needs a few seconds to find somewhere to put it. Du Huan had gone very quietous. He was sitting between Baek's men with his hands on the table in front of him, and he was looking at Tae-jun with an expression that had moved past controlled fear into something more fundamental. He was looking at a man he had believed he understood, had believed he had correctly measured, correctly assessed, correctly identified the weaknesses in, and discovering that the measurement had been wrong in ways that mattered. He looked at Imani. She was picking up her chopsticks. She glanced at him once. The look lasted about 2 seconds. Then she looked back at her food. That was the moment. Not the footage, not the financial documents, not the lawyers or the frozen accounts. That 2-second look from a woman who had every reason to need this moment to be something enormous, and who simply picked up her chopsticks. Du Huan looked away first. It would be the last thing he decided freely for a very long time, turning his gaze to the wall beside him and sitting in the chair with Baek's men on either side. And in the dining room of the Kang family mansion, the sound of quiet conversation was beginning to return, and cutlery on china, and the ordinary human sounds of people trying to find their way back to something that makes sense. And then, from the east corridor, there was a sound. A sharp sound. Not a gunshot different. The specific sound of a door being forced. Baek's head came up. Tae-jun was already moving. Across the table, Du Huan moved faster than anyone had anticipated, faster than the men beside him had accounted for. The move of a person who has had the east corridor in his calculation, since he walked through the door, and who has been waiting, through the footage and the financial documents and the speech at the head of the table, for exactly this moment, and his elbow connected with the face of the man on his left, and he was out of the chair and moving before the man had finished reacting. He went for Imani, not for the door, not for the corridor. For Imani, 3 steps around the table, fast and direct, and his hand was on her arm, and he had her up from the chair, before Tae-jun had covered half the distance between them, and the room was suddenly loud chairs back, voices, the specific controlled chaos of trained men trying to act without hitting the wrong person. Stop. Du Huan's voice was very clear. He had Imani's arm, and he was positioned with the wall behind him, and his eyes were doing the calculation, the room's exits, the bodies between him and them. His face was very focused now, all the performance gone. This was the actual man. Tae-jun stopped, 8 feet away. He looked at Du Huan's hand on his wife's arm. He looked at Imani's face. Her face was doing something that surprised him. It was not fear exactly. It was concentration, the focused, particular concentration of a person who is waiting for the right moment to do a specific thing. "You're not walking out of here," Tae-jun said. His voice was so flat, it barely sounded like a voice. "I'm walking out of here with her," Du Huan said. "And you're going to let me, because—" Imani moved. She dropped her weight straight down, not backward, not sideways, straight down. The way you move when someone is holding your arm, and the last thing they expect is for you to make yourself heavier. And Du Huan's grip broke on the downward momentum, and she stepped hard to the left, and he grabbed for her again, and missed, and she was 3 steps away from him and clear. Du Huan reached for her again. Tae-jun crossed the 8 feet. What happened in the next 4 seconds was not graceful. It was not the choreographed violence of a man who has time to be precise. It was the violence of a man who has been holding something back for approximately 12 hours and has just watched someone put his hands on his wife twice in 30 seconds. And it was concentrated, and it was fast. And when it was over, Do-hwan was on the floor against the wall, and Baek's men were on him. And the sound in the dining room was the sound of people who have just processed something significant. Tae-jun straightened. His hand hurt. He turned around. Imani was standing 4 feet away. Her dress was pulled slightly at the shoulder where Do-hwan had grabbed her. She was looking at Tae-jun with that expression again, the measuring one, the one that always seemed to be assessing not the situation, but him, specifically him, trying to determine his actual condition. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Then your hand." "I'm fine, Tae-jun, your hand." He looked at his right hand. The knuckle on his middle finger had split, not badly, but it was bleeding with the specific industriousness of knuckle cuts, making it look worse than it was. "I'm fine," he said again. She reached into the pocket of her dress he had not known. She kept things in that pocket, had not known the dress had pockets, and she produced a folded handkerchief, the small kind, and she held it out to him. He looked at it. "Take it," she said. He took it. He pressed it against his knuckle. From the floor, Do-hwan was saying something. His voice was muffled by Baek's knee on his back and the specific acoustics of the floor, but the words were audible. "This doesn't end it," Do-hwan was saying. "You think tonight ends this?" Tae-jun looked down at him. "Tell me when you believe it's over," Do-hwan said. His face was pressed into the floor, but his voice was steady, with the last steadiness of a man who has nothing left to control but his voice. "You've made enemies tonight that you don't know about yet. You've closed doors you needed open. You've shown this room that you choose." He exhaled, the weight on his back making his breathing labored, "that you choose her over this. Every person at that table is going to remember that." Tae-jun crouched down. He was close to Do-hwan's face. The handkerchief was pressed against his knuckle. The room behind him was very quiet. "I know," he said. Do-hwan blinked. "I know they'll remember it," Tae-jun said. "That's the point." He stayed crouched for a moment. "You spent 4 years believing my wife was my vulnerability. You were right that she mattered to me more than anything else in this room. You were wrong about what that meant." He stood back up. "It meant that tonight, when I showed this room who she was and what was done to her, it meant they were watching a man who knows what he values. And a man who knows what he values is not a man whose organization falls apart because someone took a run at it." He straightened his jacket. "Get him up," he said to Baek. Do-hwan was brought to his feet. He looked across the room. At the senior members of the organization, at the 2 loyalists who were sitting very still between their respective handlers, at Mi-suk, who was looking at him with an expression that had moved entirely past composure into something rawer, a woman, seeing the full shape of a decision she had made and measuring the distance between what she had believed it was and what it actually turned out to be. Do-hwan looked at Imani last. She looked back at him. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She just stood in the middle of the room in her burgundy dress, with the shoulders slightly pulled and her chin level, and she looked at him with the eyes of someone who has spent 3 years being underestimated and has come to a dinner specifically because she was done with the consequences of other people's underestimation. The front doors of the Kang mansion opened at 9:47. The authorities arrived at 9:52, which was exactly when the call from the corporate lawyers had told Tae-jun they would arrive. Because in this one specific domain, the legal, legitimate world, things ran on the schedule that had been arranged. Do-hwan left the Kang mansion in the company of 3 men who were not his. The dining room behind him was still lit. The food was still on the table. And in the east corridor, the sound of a forced door swinging loose on its bracket echoed quietly in the empty hall. Do-hwan's contingency plan, the exit that had been waiting, the thing he had believed would be his way. The east corridor door swung on its broken bracket for a long time after everyone had stopped listening to it. Nobody went to fix it that night. The dinner ended the way things end when the event they were built around has already happened quietly. with the specific awkward efficiency of people who need to be somewhere else but aren't quite sure how to begin leaving. The senior members departed in small groups, some of them stopping to speak briefly with Tae-jun near the entry hall, some of them leaving without speaking at all, which was its own kind of communication. Han, the northern logistics man, shook Tae-jun's hand on the way out and held it for a moment longer than a handshake requires and said nothing, which from Han meant something considerable. The two loyalists were escorted out separately. They would both cooperate. Tae-jun knew this before they'd even left the room. Men who stay seated when they have the option of standing are already making their choice. By 11 o'clock, the house was quiet. The staff moved through the dining room clearing plates with the careful silence of people who understood that the air in the house had changed and that speaking too loudly in changed air was its own kind of risk. The good china was washed and put away. The extended table was returned to its regular length. The temporary screen bracket was unbolted from the wall and carried out by Lim's men, leaving 2 small holes in the plaster that someone would fill in the morning. Tae-jun sat in the empty dining room for 20 minutes after everyone had gone. He sat at the head of the table with Imani's handkerchief still wrapped around his knuckle. The blood dried now, the fabric stiff with it. He had a glass of water in front of him that he hadn't drunk. He was looking at the wall where the screen had been, at the 2 small holes in the plaster, and he was doing the thing he did at the end of operations, the accounting. Not the operational accounting, not the logistics of what had been completed and what remained. The other accounting. The one that came after, when the momentum stopped and the quiet arrived and you had to sit in what you'd done and what it had cost. The cost was not small. He understood that clearly sitting in the empty dining room. He had dismantled something tonight that could not be reassembled. The organization would survive, he was certain of that, or as certain as you could be about anything in the world he operated in. The legal structure was solid. The evidence was documented. The men who mattered had seen what they needed to see, and most of them would stay. That part was as contained as it was going to get. The other part was not contained. He heard footsteps in the hallway and looked up. Baek appeared in the doorway. "Duhwan is processed," Baek said. "The corporate lawyers are managing the intake. He's not talking yet, but with the financial documentations. He'll talk eventually," Tae-jun said. "Or he won't need to. Either way." Baek nodded. He stayed in the doorway. He had something else to say. Tae-jun could tell by the way he was standing. "The call from the sitting room this morning," Baek said. "We traced the relay." "I know who made it," Tae-jun said. "Yes, sir." A pause. "She's in her room," Baek said. "Miss Sua. She hasn't come out since 9 o'clock. Tae-jun looked at the water glass. "I know, and Mrs. Kang, I know, Baek." Baek left. Tae-jun sat for another few minutes. Then he picked up the water glass and drank it, all of it in one long pull, and set the empty glass down and pushed back the chair and stood up. He went to his mother's room first, not because she was the priority, because she was the harder conversation, and he had learned, over the years, that you do the harder thing while you still have the energy for it, before the weight of the day settles into your bones and makes you want to put everything off until tomorrow. He knocked. This time he knocked. He wasn't entirely sure why. Some instinct about what the night required. "Come in," she said. She was sitting in the chair by her window, the one she always sat in when she read in the evenings, though she was not reading tonight. Her hands were in her lap, and the lamp beside her was the only light in the room, and she looked smaller than usual, which was not something he had ever thought about his mother before. My-suk had always occupied her full space, every room she entered, every conversation she participated in. Tonight she was sitting in her chair, and she looked like someone the room was slightly too large for. He came in and sat on the edge of the settee across from her. They looked at each other. "He used me," she said. "Yes, I knew that," she said, by the end of it. Perhaps before the end. She looked at her hands. "I knew his interests were not the same as mine, but his direction was the same as mine. And when the direction is the same, you told yourself the intentions were close enough." She was quiet. "How long did you know," Tae-jun said, "that it was connected to him, that the information you were giving him was being used as part of something larger?" My Suk's hands moved slightly in her lap. I suspected perhaps 6 months ago. I didn't ask him directly because she stopped. Because if you asked directly, you'd have to do something about the answer. She looked at him then. The look was complicated. It had defense in it, and something that was not quite shame but lived in the same neighborhood, and underneath both of those things, something older and harder, the specific stubbornness of a person who has built their convictions out of such old material that questioning one feels like pulling a stone from a load-bearing wall. I believed, she said carefully, that the marriage was wrong for you. I believe that still. I want you to know that I am not sitting here telling you I was wrong about everything because I'm afraid of what you're going to do. I'm telling you. She stopped again, restarted. What I did to her. What I allowed, what I did. The things I said. Her eyes went briefly to his hand, to the dried blood at the knuckle. She had put that bruise on her daughter-in-law's wrist with her own hand, and she was going to have to sit with that knowledge, Rhett, for the rest of her life. Those things were wrong. Not wrong because of Du Huan. Wrong in themselves. The room was very quiet. Tae-jun looked at his mother. He had known this woman for 34 years. He had loved her with the specific and complicated love of a firstborn son raised in a family, where love and expectation came bundled together so tightly you couldn't get a hand between them. He had disappointed her in various ways over the years, and she had disappointed him in others, and they had always somehow found their way back to a functional version of what they were to each other, because she was his mother and he was her son, and those facts, in their world, were supposed to be stronger than anything else. He understood tonight that those facts were not stronger than anything else. But they were strong, they were real, but they were not infinitely load-bearing. They had a limit, and he had seen that limit tonight on a screen in his own dining room. "You're going to leave this house," he said. Mi-suk's chin came up slightly. Not in defiance, in preparation. "There is a property in Yongsan," he said. "It's comfortable. It has staff. You will not lack for anything material." He paused. "But you will not live in this house. Not while Imani is here. Not for a long time. And whether you come back to any family event, any dinner, any gathering, anything, that will be her decision. Not mine. Hers." Mi-suk looked at him for a long moment. He expected argument. He had prepared for it. He knew her arguments: blood, history, sacrifice, the 30 years she had spent building the social infrastructure that supported the legitimate face of the Kang family's wealth, the connections and the relationships, and the work that nobody acknowledged as work because it had been done in silk and jade rather than in offices. She didn't argue. "All right," she said, "just that." He looked at her. "I'm tired, Tae-jun," she said. It was the first time tonight she had sounded like what she was, a 62-year-old woman at the end of a very long day. "I've been holding this position for a very long time. And tonight I watched a man I gave information to get walked out of my house by prosecutors. And I watched the footage of what I did. I watched it the way everyone else watched it. And I saw..." She pressed her lips together. "I saw what it looked like. From the outside." She was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to stop holding the position now." He nodded. He stood up. He stood there for a moment, not quite sure what to do with the ending of this conversation. He settled on the thing that was true. "I don't know what we look like from here," he said. "I'm not going to pretend I do." "No," she said. "Neither will I." He left. Su-ah's door was not quite closed. He could see the light through the gap, her desk lamp, the small one, which she used when she was awake, but didn't want to signal to the rest of the house that she was awake. He had known this about her since she was 15. He knocked on the doorframe. "I know it's you," she said. He pushed the door open. She was at her desk, not at the chair by the window the way their mother had been. Su-ah, in crisis, went to her desk. She needed a surface, something to put her hands on. She was sitting there with both palms flat on the desktop, and she was looking at him when he came in with the face of someone who has been preparing for a conversation and still doesn't feel ready for it. He sat on the edge of her bed. He looked at her. She looked back. "I called him," she said. Not as a confession, the time for that had passed. They both knew, and Su-ah had never been someone who performed emotion she didn't feel. "This morning, after you came out of Amma's study. I heard what she said. You had the files. The communications. I panicked. I know, he said. I wasn't thinking about what it would do to you, she said. Or to the operation. I was thinking. She pressed her palms harder against the desk. I thought if he knew you were moving fast, he would. I don't know what I thought. I thought maybe he would go, leave the country, disappear. And then there wouldn't have to be. She stopped. You thought if he ran, I wouldn't find out how deep it went, Tae-jun said. And I could be angry about what had happened to Imani without knowing how much of it you knew about. Sua looked at her hands. Yes, she said. He sat with that for a moment. How much did you know, he said. The full answer. Not the version you gave me this morning. She exhaled. It was a long exhalation, the kind that releases something that has been compressed for a long time. I knew the documents weren't routine, she said. I knew you hadn't approved them. Du-hwan told me months ago, when he first approached me, that the idea was to create a financial structure that would make it easier for the organization to function if your personal circumstances changed. He said it was a contingency. He said smart organizations plan for contingencies. She paused. He told me the pressure on Imani was separate, that it was Amma's choice, that he had validated Amma's concerns, but that the domestic situation and the financial restructuring were two different things. And you believed that. I wanted to believe it. She looked up at him. There's a difference. And I know there's a difference. And I've been sitting in this room for 3 hours, knowing the difference and knowing which side of it I was on. Her voice was steady, but the steadiness was costing her something. I wanted her gone, Oppa. I want you to hear me say that. Not because Du-hwan told me to want it. Because I wanted it. I thought she was wrong for you and wrong for this family, and I made it easy to believe that anything done toward that end was defensible. She pressed her lips together. It wasn't. Tae-jun looked at his sister. 27 years. The bicycle in the driveway. The university graduation. The twice-weekly calls. You're going to lose your positions in the family businesses, he said. All of them. The board seat, the consulting arrangements, the gallery connection. Everything that came through me. She nodded. She had known this was coming. He could see she'd already done the accounting on it. You'll have your own accounts, he said. What's yours is yours. I'm not your enemy. But you don't get to operate inside what I've built. Not for a long time. Not until you've built something yourself, something I didn't hand to you. He paused. And the same condition applies to Amma. Any contact with this house, with Imani, that's her call. Not mine. Sua was quiet for a moment. Is she going to be all right? Sua said. The question surprised him slightly. Not because it was unexpected, but because of the quality of it. It was genuine. He could hear that. The genuine question of someone who has spent a long time working hard not to think about a person as a person and is now, in the aftermath of that effort, reckoning with what the person actually is. I don't know yet, he said honestly. She's been carrying things for 3 years. That doesn't fix overnight. Sua looked at her hands again. She never cried, she said, in front of us. Not once. She said it quietly, the way you say something you've been sitting with and haven't had a place to put. I thought it meant she didn't care, that she was distant. Cold, she paused. She wasn't cold. No, Tae-jun said. She wasn't. He stood up. Go to sleep, he said. We'll talk more in a few days. Appa. She said it, like she used to say it, when she was 10 years old and needed something from him that she didn't quite know how to ask for. I'm sorry, for what it's worth. I know, he said. Get some sleep. He found Imani on the rooftop terrace. The Kang mansion had a terrace on the 3rd floor that nobody used much in autumn. The wind off the hills came in cold and direct, and the outdoor furniture had been stored weeks ago. She was standing at the railing with her arms folded against the cold, still in the burgundy dress, and she had found somewhere an old cardigan, one of his dark navy, oversized on her, and she was wearing it over the dress, with the sleeves pushed up slightly. He came out and stood beside her. Below them, Seoul extended in every direction, the particular density of it, the lights, the sound that never fully stopped even at this hour, that ambient low frequency of a city that sleeps and shifts. The Han River was visible in the distance, a dark ribbon catching light at intervals. He stood beside her without speaking. She didn't look at him right away. She was looking at the city. Cold, he said. I know, she said. I didn't want to be inside yet. He understood that. He stood beside her and felt the cold coming in off the hills, and they were quiet together for a while, the kind of quiet that isn't the absence of communication, but a different form of it. How is she? Imani said. He looked at her. Which one? Your mother. He thought about how to answer that honestly. She's tired. I think she's been holding something up for a long time, and tonight it came down. He paused. She's going to the Yongsan property. I told her. I heard, Imani said. Some of it. The walls aren't as thick as this house wants you to think they are. He was quiet for a moment. I told her any contact with this house was your decision. Imani looked at him then. He held her gaze. You understand what I mean by that, he said. I'm not asking you to forgive anything, or accept anything, or make any particular decision. I'm telling you the decision is yours, however long it takes. Whatever it looks like. She looked back at the city. She came to my room this afternoon, Imani said. He stilled. Before the dinner? Around 4 o'clock. I don't think she'd planned to. She knocked what she has never done in 3 years. She has never once knocked on that door, and when I opened it, she was just standing there in the hallway, and she looked. Imani paused. She looked like someone who has finally put something down that they've been carrying so long they forgot. It was heavy. She was quiet for a moment. She didn't say a lot. She said she needed me to know that what she had done was not that it had not been purely about me, that it had started before I arrived, that I had been the direction of something that already existed. That's true, Tae-jun said. I know, Imani said. Duhwan found a door that was already unlocked. She pulled the cardigan tighter around her. She didn't ask me for anything. That was the part that she stopped. She just said it, and then she left. She didn't ask me to forgive her, or to understand or to make it easier for her. She just said the thing and walked away. Does that matter to you? Imani thought about it. Genuinely thought about it. The way she did things, not quickly, not with the fast calculation she used for defensive purposes, but slowly, with the whole of herself. Yes, she said. It matters. I don't know yet what I'm going to do with it. But it matters. He nodded. They stood in the cold for another few minutes. Then she said, I need to tell you something. Okay. She turned, so she was leaning back against the railing and looking at the house rather than the city, and she looked at him with the direct steadiness that was one of the most consistent things about her through everything. I wasn't only quiet because I was afraid of what you'd do, she said. I told you that this morning, and it was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. He waited. I wasn't sure you'd believe me, she said. Over them, over your mother, over 3 years of history that I wasn't part of. She kept her gaze on his face, watching him take this in. You chose me. You married me. You brought me here, and you told me this was my home. But I grew up in a world where being told something is yours and actually having it are two different things, and I have known my whole life that the second one requires proof that the first one can't provide. She paused. I was waiting to see what you did when it cost you something. Not what you said, what you did. Tae-jun was very still. 3 years, he said. 3 years, she said. And I'm not, she stopped. Started again. I'm not saying that to punish you. I need you to understand that. I'm saying it because you asked me why I didn't tell you, and I'm giving you the full answer. He looked at her for a long moment. At the burgundy dress and his old cardigan and the railing behind her and the Seoul skyline behind that, and he thought about a woman who had eaten cold rice from a tray on a kitchen floor and maintained her dignity in the face of 3 years of systematic erosion, and who had nonetheless spent those 3 years with a private, kept question about whether the person she had trusted most in her life would believe her if she told him the truth. He had not been believable enough. That was the fact of it. He had not made himself a person his wife could bring the truth to without running a prior calculation on the odds of being believed. That was not a failure he could fix in a night. I know, he said. She looked at him. I know, he said again, and I understand why. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you it won't take time, because that would be the same kind of thing, the kind of thing that sounds right and doesn't require anything from me. He held her gaze. I'm going to do the slower thing. What's the slower thing? Not explain. He reached out and took her hand, the unbruised one, The same one he'd held upstairs that morning. He held it without squeezing. Just held it. Just show up. For as long as it takes. She looked at their hands. She didn't say anything, but she didn't take her hand back. They stood on the rooftop in the November cold, with Sol spread out below them and his hand around hers, and she leaned her shoulder very slightly against his arm, which was not much in fact a minimal gesture, barely perceptible, but which, from Imani, he understood was considerable. 3 months passed. They were not easy months. Tae-jun had not promised easy, and he had not gotten it. The organization required significant restructuring in the wake of Do-hwan's arrest and the exposure of the financial instruments. 2 of the senior members departed voluntarily, which was cleaner than the alternative. 3 more required extended conversations that took weeks and produced results that were workable, if not entirely satisfying. The legitimate business side, the shipping companies, the logistics holdings, the property management arm that Tae-jun had been building toward for years became more central to the operation by necessity as he dismantled the parts that could not withstand scrutiny. It was slower. It was more complicated. There were weeks where he worked 18 hours and came to bed after Imani was asleep and was up before she woke, and he would find her in the mornings with coffee already made, and she would hand him a cup without ceremony. And he would drink it standing at the kitchen counter. Sometimes they talked, and sometimes they didn't, and both kinds of mornings were more real than most of what his days contained. Choi was removed from his position and took an arrangement that kept him out of prosecution in exchange for full cooperation, which he gave. The cooperation closed 2 additional threads of the financial investigation and produced evidence that was useful in a way that Tae-jun made sure to acknowledge to the prosecutors, not for Choi's sake, but because accuracy mattered. Do-hwan did not go quietly. He had lawyers. He had resources he had been careful to keep outside the frozen instruments. The case took time, but Lim's sweep had been thorough, and the corporate lawyers were meticulous, and the outcome was never seriously in doubt. He went away. That was the plain fact of it. The specific mechanism of his departure from the Kang organization's world was legal and documented and took several months, but the result was the same as Tae-jun had promised. In the dining room, he was gone. Mi-suk settled into the Yongsan property with 2 staff members she trusted and a schedule that was quieter than anything she had maintained in 30 years. She did not ask to see Imani. She called Tae-jun once a week on Sundays, and the calls were brief and careful and contained, slowly and with considerable difficulty, the work of 2 people learning how to be in relation to each other after a significant thing has broken and been acknowledged as broken. Sua moved to an apartment in Mapo. She found work on her own design work, which she was genuinely good at, which Tae-jun had always known, and which she had apparently never fully tested against the world, because the alternative of simply existing inside her brother's infrastructure had always been available. The work was small at first, then it wasn't. She called Tae-jun on his birthday, and they spoke for 40 minutes about things that were not the dinner, and not Do-hwan, and not the sitting room phone call. And at the end of the call, she said she was sorry again, and he said he knew, and they hung up. He sat with his phone in his hand for a moment, thinking about a girl learning to ride a bicycle in this driveway. The driveway was full of autumn leaves. Someone had forgotten to sweep it. He went and got the broom himself. Imani called Dara. Not a text, not a message. A real call, video, on a Tuesday afternoon in December, when the light and Seoul had that particular low winter quality that made everything look like it was happening slightly in the past. Dara picked up on the second ring and looked at her and said, "You have something to tell me." Imani laughed. The kind of laugh that sounds surprised by itself. "I have a lot to tell you," she said. They were on the phone for 2 hours. Imani told her most of it, not all, not the operational details, not the parts that weren't hers to tell. But the parts that were hers, the kitchen floor, the tray, the missing chair, the 3 years of small erosions, and the specific calculus of silence. The bruise. The morning Tae-jun came home early. All of it. The shape of it. The texture of it. The way it had felt from inside. Dara listened. Dara, who noticed quiet and said things out loud, and had been Imani's friend for 9 years. Did not say I knew something was wrong, or you should have told me sooner, or any of the other things that were probably true and wouldn't help right now. She just listened, and when Imani finished, she said, "How are you now?" "Today. Right now." Imani considered the question the way she considered things. "I'm not sure I know yet. Some days are fine. Some days I'm eating breakfast, and I reach for my phone to check if anyone scheduled me out of my chair this week, and then I remember, and that's—" She stopped. "It takes time, apparently." "Apparently," Dara said dryly. "My therapist says I might have been managing things in compartments," Imani said. "Apparently, that's a sophisticated way of describing a problem." "Your therapist sounds right. She usually is. It's irritating." Dara laughed. "And Tae-jun," Dara said carefully. Imani was quiet for a moment. "He put a chair in the kitchen," she said. "What?" "The chair they took away. He found out what chair it was I didn't tell him. He looked at the footage and figured it out, that's very him, actually, and he found the original chair. Had it refinished, put it back at the table himself." She paused. "He didn't tell me he was going to. I just came down one morning, and it was there." Dara was quiet, and Imani said he fired the kitchen assistant, who saw and kept walking. But then he hired him back 2 weeks later, because apparently the kid apologized in writing and explained that Mi-suk had explicitly threatened his family's income, and Tae-jun decided. She stopped again. He said that punishing people for surviving impossible positions was something he was trying to stop doing. Dara said. "Don't," Imani said. "I didn't say anything." "You made a sound. That was a thoughtful sound." "It was a he's trying sound." "Those can be the same thing," Dara said. Imani looked out the kitchen window. The winter garden was gray and bare, and someone had recently planted something along the far border. She'd watched the gardener doing it last week. Small bulbs, probably for spring. She hadn't asked what they were going to be. "Yeah," she said. "They can." The formal dinner that happened 4 months after the other formal dinner was Mi-suk's idea. This surprised everyone, including Tae-jun. She called him on a Sunday and proposed it. A small gathering. Family only Byung-soo the uncle, 2 cousins who had not been involved in anything, Soo-ah, if Imani was comfortable with it. She said, "I am not asking for what it was before. I am asking for the chance to be in a room together and have it be different. I want to show her I understand what different means." Tae-jun said he would ask Imani. Imani said yes. She said yes on the condition that she could leave whenever she wanted, without explanation, and that nobody would comment on anything she ate or wore or said, and that if Mi-suk had anything to say to her, she would say it directly and not through someone else. Mi-suk agreed to all 3 conditions without qualification. The dinner was on a Saturday in February. It was uncomfortable, the way honest things often are when they're new. Mi-suk was not warm, she was not a warm person, and pretending otherwise would have been its own kind of insult. But she was careful, in a way she had never been careful before, about the space she took up. She asked Imani a question about Chicago, about her family there, and it was an ordinary question, the kind that acknowledges a person's life outside the room they're currently in, and she listened to the answer. Not well, she was not practiced at listening, but she listened, and she did not turn the conversation back to herself, which was as much as anyone was going to get from Mi-suk in February. Soo-ah sat across from Imani and said very little. When the food was being cleared, she said, looking at the table rather than at Imani, "The dress you're wearing. Is that one you brought from Chicago?" "Yes," Imani said. "It's a good color on you," Soo-ah said. It was not an apology. It was nowhere near an apology. But it was Soo-ah, who had never voluntarily said anything positive about Imani's appearance in 4 years, choosing to say it, which meant something in its smallness. "Thank you," Imani said. They went back to eating. Near the end of dinner, Byung-soo, who was 70 years old and had the prerogative of the very old to say things directly, looked at Imani from across the table and said, "You stayed in this family through everything." "Why?" The table got quiet. Imani looked at the old man. "Because I wasn't going to let the worst version of this place be the only version," she said. Byung-soo nodded. Slowly, the nod of a man who has been alive long enough to understand what a sentence like that costs. He raised his water glass. After a moment, everyone else raised theirs. Mi-suk raised hers last. Her hand was very steady. Later that night, Tae-jun and Imani were in the kitchen. Not a formal occasion, just the kitchen late, the way kitchens are at 11 o'clock when a dinner party has ended the slight disorder of it, the glasses left on the counter, the smell of food and company. He was washing up because the staff had gone, and he didn't mind it, had never minded it, though this was something most people in his world would have found surprising. She was sitting at the kitchen table in the chair that had been refinished and returned, and she had her elbows on the table and her chin in her hands, watching him. "She's not going to become a different person," Imani said. "No," he agreed. "She's going to be who she is, and some of who she is I'm always going to find difficult." "I know, and that has to be okay," Imani said. "Not good. Not resolved. Just okay. Manageable. Real." He turned off the water and dried his hands and turned around and leaned against the counter. "Is it?" he said. "Manageable." She considered it. "Ask me in 6 months," she said. He smiled. It was a small smile, the kind he didn't produce often, and that meant more for its rarity. She noticed it, the way she noticed most things about him, quickly, accurately, with the specific attention of someone who has been paying close attention for a long time and has learned to read the small vocabulary of a person who communicates mostly in the small. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. He looked at her at the table, in the chair. "I missed 4 years of dinners with you. The real kind. I'm counting." She looked at him for a moment. "You have time," she said. He pushed off the counter and came to the table and sat across from her, and there was nothing on the table between them. No food, no occasion. Just the two of them in the kitchen at 11 o'clock, with the overhead light making everything slightly warm and yellow, and outside the winter was doing whatever winter did. And the city was its usual ambient self, and the house around them was quiet, in the specific way it had only recently begun to be quiet, not the silence of a held breath. Not the silence of people managing each other, but the ordinary silence of a place where the occupants don't need to be defended against each other. He reached across the table. She put her hand in his. "I didn't save you," he said. She looked at him. "I know you know that," he said. "But I want to say it out loud. You survived what happened in this house, and you did it without me. I'm not going to position myself as the thing that rescued you from something I should have seen was happening." He held her gaze. "What I did was finally show up. That's not the same thing as saving someone." She was quiet for a moment. "No," she said. "It's not." "There's a difference," he said. She looked at their hands on the table. "I finally believed you," he said. "That's all. I know," she said. "Tae-jun, yeah. I know," she said again. "Quieter. The way you say something when you mean it has already landed and doesn't need to be said again." He was quiet. Outside, the winter city hummed its low frequency. A car passed somewhere on the hill road, headlights sweeping briefly across the kitchen window, and then gone. The light in the room was steady and yellow and ordinary. His hand was around hers on the table. She was not the woman who had sat on the kitchen floor 4 months ago. Or she was exactly that woman. Every part of her that had survived 3 years of small and deliberate erosion was still that woman, but she was also the woman who had walked into a room of 22 people and sat at the head of the table and looked at Park Do-hwan for 2 seconds, and then looked back at her food. And both of those women were the same woman, and he knew her, finally, as she actually was, rather than as the version his absence had allowed to be constructed around her. She was not the strongest person in the room, because she had never broken. She was the strongest person in the room, because she had been broken in the ways that are available to human beings, who are under sustained pressure, and she had kept going anyway, kept herself recognizable to herself anyway, kept the thing that was specifically and irreducibly her intact through conditions designed to erode it. That wasn't invincibility. That was something harder than invincibility. That was the thing he was going to spend the rest of his life being honest about having almost missed. She squeezed his hand once, briefly, and let it go. She stood up. "Come to bed," she said. "It's late." He looked at her. She was already moving toward the hallway, the burgundy dress from earlier exchanged for something simpler now. His cardigan still around her shoulders, her feet quiet on the kitchen floor. He stood up. He turned off the kitchen light. In the dark, The chair she sat in was just a chair, solid and ordinary, and in its proper place, exactly where it was always going to be now. And in the morning, the light would come in through the window and fall across it, the way it fell across everything in this house. That had slowly, imperfectly, with considerable effort and no small amount of damage, become what it was supposed to be. He followed her out of the kitchen. The house was quiet around them. Outside, Seoul went on being soul complicated and unceasing, and full of every possible version of a human life happening simultaneously. Inside, a door closed softly, and that was enough.